Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. This is Leigh from Leigh's Art Studio, and this is part 2 of my painting of the river and the mountains with the Australian gum trees in the foreground. So this is where I left off at the end of part 1. I have had to actually change it a little bit, so it looks a bit different to when you last saw it. I had the trees curving around at the sides for some reason. I don't know what I thought I was doing there, but anyway, I've fixed that up, and I'm now going to put the foliage on those trees, painting the water and the river bank. I'm using a fairly big brush here, and I did actually manicure this brush a little bit before I started painting because it's got really dense bristles and I couldn't get it to squish out the way I wanted it to, so I got a little pair of scissors and cut some of the bristles out of the middle of it and then smashed it around on some concrete to try and soften the bristles up. It made a little bit of an improvement, but it still isn't the way I wanted it. So what I've got on the brush as far as paint goes is my green colour that I made for the mountains in the background. So it's the same colour, but it's got a little bit more yellow in it. And then on the other side of the brush I've got that dark purple colour. And that was made with the cobalt blue and magenta. Crimson actually, sorry, not magenta. So I'm just tapping in the leaves on the trees where the sun is shining. Wasn't 100% happy with the shape of these leaves, so I did come back in with another brush, a smaller one, and change some of the shapes a little bit, which you'll see in a moment. I think a trip to the hardware store is on the cards tomorrow to buy another one of those little raggedy brushes that I had before, which just has miraculously disappeared. Must have grown legs and walked away, I think. So now I've switched to the smaller brush and I'm just detailing that a bit more. Still with the same combination of paint, the purple on one side and the green on the other. But this brush isn't still working the way I want it to, but anyway, it is what it is. Hope everybody's well and happy, keeping safe. Having a little bit of an outbreak here in Australia at the moment of COVID, so I guess we had to have our turn sooner or later. We're pretty lucky with escaping it so far. I don't know if you've noticed the difference from the way it looked before to having put in the smaller brush strokes over the top. I think it looks more natural. It's hard to paint and stay out of the camera because you're sort of standing over to the side of the canvas with your arms stretched out, so you're not actually looking straight at what you're painting. So things get a little bit out of whack from time to time. I'll try not to get my big head in the way too much. So I've just moved over to the other side of the canvas now and I'm working on the right hand side. Doing the same thing. Just correcting some foliage where I think they're way too long. They look like great big ferns instead of trees. This does the trick anyway. just putting in some branches and tree trunks with a little liner brush, and I've just got a mixture of off-white on the paintbrush, and I've thinned it out. It's fairly liquidy, so it comes off the brush a bit easier. I don't want to put in every single branch or tree trunk that would be there. That would just be too time consuming and would make the background way too busy. So just a few here and there is all that's needed. I have just noticed that my tree trunks aren't thick enough at the bottom, so in the next video I'll fix that up. I try not to make them all equally spaced or equal lengths and that sort of thing. Try and keep a variety of direction and trunk thicknesses and that sort of thing. It's been really cool here for the last couple of days. It's normally we would have really warm weather in the beginning of spring, which we did for the first few days, I guess. But last night, well, I think it got down to about 10 degrees, and that's quite unusual for this time of year. So haven't taken the warm blankets or the fluffy sheets off the bed yet. I've thought about it a couple of times and then not done it. I'm so glad I haven't. I'm just using the same mixture of paint but with a little bit of extra yellow and some white in it to add some lighter highlights to the tops of the branches, the tops of the leaves I should say. And I want it to separate, make a definite separation between the mountain and the trees. There's not a great deal of difference in the colour of the trees in the foreground and the trees on the mountain, so adding that highlight to the tops sort of makes them stand out a bit. So I'm just painting white right across the canvas. This is going to be where my water is. So I'm putting white all the way across and down into the front right hand corner. And that colour that I'm putting in there now is phthalo blue. And I'm just going to merge that up into the white. Back to using that big brush again. Now I'm putting my reflections in the water, so I'm doing it a bit at a time, and what I've done is I've painted a rough shape of the outline of the trees with the purple, and now I'm just going over it with the green colour to simulate the leaves. And then once I've finished doing that, I'll get a big dry brush and gently wipe across it. So reflections always come straight towards you, so the first brush strokes are coming straight down the canvas towards me, and then brush across in the opposite direction, and that gives it a nice blurry look, the way that a reflection would look in water. I will come back and touch up these reflections a bit later on as well. We've got to put the tree trunks in, so I'm just doing them lightly now. They don't have to be exactly the same, just approximately. And that's the rigger brush that I'm using, the same one that I used to paint the branches and trunks above the waterline. And I'll continue this all the way across the painting. If I wasn't filming this, I would turn the canvas upside down to do these reflections. I find that a little bit easier. Painting something upside down is a challenge. Probably need to get it out of your mind that you're actually painting something upside down and just paint the shapes. That paint's quite wet there, so I did have to use the big brush on it a couple of times to blur those reflections to the so they look the way I wanted them to look. When putting in the reflections of the tree trunk, so if they're leaning to the right above the water, then the reflection is leaning in, it's got to lean the same way. It's got to, like you can see where I've done the tree in the middle there. It's like obviously a mirror image of what's above it. It's quite easy to do them wrong when you first start doing them, to have them continuing instead of leaning the same way. Sounds confusing, but so if that one that's just where I'm painting now leans a little bit to the right, if I painted that straight down into the water in the same, like the same trunk, just keeping going straight down into the water, it's not going to look right. It's got to go in the same direction from the bank over to the right to make it look realistic. Mind you, having said that, this is an impressionistic painting. It's not going for realism. Some parts of it probably look quite real, but all in all, it's impressionistic, which is the way I love to paint. If I'm not painting that way, I'm painting abstractly. And I really love to pile the paint on the canvas, so if I have a painting that I get sick of, quite often it's difficult for me to paint over it because I've used so much paint on it on the original painting. Yeah, haven't got that nice smooth surface to paint over. I did once try to sand off some paint, and all I ended up doing was putting holes in the canvas, so I haven't worried about doing that again. I think once all my canvases run out, I might just switch to painting on watercolour paper. I don't really like painting on mixed media paper. It's not solid enough for me. Oh, okay, so what happened here? I was having a good day today. Forgot to put switch the brain on before I started. This is the right hand side of the bank, and I forgot to zoom back out. I was actually filming, but I had the camera focused on another part of the painting. Silly me. The penny dropped after a little while and I zoomed out again, but by that stage I'd already put most of this bank in. So I just used a palette knife to create the bank with greens and yellows, and then the rocks at the front, they're all done with a palette knife as well. And I just loaded all the dark colours onto the palette knife. What I'm doing here is I'm trying to make it look like the water recedes into that area there, so it's like a little bay. And I'm just removing some of the original paint. I'm going to make that darker in there and put a little bank in the distance. Just carving some rocks into the bank here with the palette knife. Reshaping a bit of the paint where it's a bit thick and didn't have much definition there, so just created a bit more interest. It's always a good idea to put a light line like I've just done there, and it draws the eye back into the painting. I just thought I would just go through and add a few highlights into the tree reflections. I dried a little bit darker than I wanted them to be. It's a good idea to wipe your brush off each time you pass over the reflections, just to get the excess paint off it, because what will happen is your brush will get wet from the paint for one thing, and then you'll transfer that paint to other areas that you don't want it in. So I've got a roll of paper towel in my other hand, and I'm wiping that brush on the paper towel in between strokes. I'm just correcting that area there because I didn't wipe the paint off the brush, and it made exactly what I said would happen if you don't wipe the brush happened there. So I got streaks of paint where I didn't want it. I'm just replacing some of the tree trunks that had got lost in the blurring those reflections out, fixing them up. So I'm going to put a bank in, and I'm just indicating where I'm putting that bank. So I'm just using all the dark colours that are left on my palette to put this undercoat of the bank in. It doesn't matter what they are, just whatever's on there, use it up and fill it in because it's going to be covered over anyway. Putting some of the lighter earthy colours in there now as well, just to use them up, and a bit of an indication of some grass in the background. Most of this is going to be covered over, but it's best to have it in there in the first place and paint over it, because then you haven't got that issue of like trying to paint a blade of grass that's peeping out from behind a tree or something like that. So it's there in the first place, so that's half the battle. Then you only need to put the grass in front of the trees. I'm just going to put some lines in the water that indicate a bit of movement in the water. These lines need to be perfectly straight and in line with the bottom of the canvas. I find that so hard to do though, and I think it's because the shape of the palette knife is not a straight line. I mean, it's a straight line, but it's a diamond shape, so it's at an angle. So keeping it straight is hard for me. I can't draw a straight line at the best of times anyway. So we'll leave it here for today, and when I come back I'll be putting some trees on the riverbank. One on the right hand side, a couple in the background on the left side, and then the main tree will go in the middle there. Yeah, and it'll cover a fair bit of the actual canvas. So it'll start just up from the bottom and be right up into the sky. So I hope you join me for part 3 and the conclusion of this painting. Thank you for watching. Bye for now.